Welcome to Inside American Politics by Skoob. I'm your host, Bradley Teller, and today we're diving deep into one of the most explosive topics in American politics, identity politics. Now, before you roll your eyes or reach for that unsubscribe button, hear me out. This isn't another partisan rant. This is the untold story of how America transformed from a nation of political big tents into warring tribes, and why everyone, yes everyone, is playing this game whether they admit it or not. This episode is brought to you by Skoob, where you'll find dozens of deeper, unfiltered political breakdowns just like this one. There's a lot more waiting for you inside the app. Link in the description. Picture this. It's 1950s America. The Democratic Party is this wild, almost schizophrenic coalition. You've got liberal intellectuals in New York sharing a party with segregationist Dixiecrats in Alabama. Meanwhile, the Republicans? They've got East Coast liberals rubbing shoulders with Midwest conservatives. Evangelical Christians? They're split pretty evenly between both parties. Nobody could call either party godless because, well, both had plenty of believers. It sounds chaotic, but here's the beautiful irony. This chaos actually kept the peace. When your own party contains people who disagree with you, you can't demonize the other side too much. Congressional Republicans and Democrats would fight over taxes and unions, sure, but they'd also find common ground. Liberal Democrats and Republicans would team up on civil rights, while conservative Democrats and right-wing Republicans formed their own alliance to block it. But then came the 1960s, and everything changed. The civil rights movement didn't just transform America's moral landscape, it detonated our entire political system. When Lyndon Johnson embraced the 1964 Civil Rights Act and Barry Goldwater opposed it, they didn't just take policy positions. They carved out tribal territories. Democrats became the party of civil rights. Republicans became the party of the racial status quo. What followed was the greatest political migration in American history. Southern whites fled to the Republican Party like refugees from a burning building. Nixon's Southern strategy and Reagan's coded racial messages sent a clear signal: this is your new home. Meanwhile, newly enfranchised black voters and liberal Republicans headed in the opposite direction, straight into Democratic arms. By century's end, the solidly Democratic South had become solidly Republican, and the Republican Northeast had turned reliably blue. But more than geography changed, ideology did too. For the first time in nearly a century, partisanship and ideology converged. The big tents collapsed, and we sorted ourselves into ideologically pure camps. Now here's where things get really interesting, and where most people get it completely wrong. Let's talk about identity politics, shall we? I need to let you in on a secret that's hiding in plain sight. Everyone is engaged in identity politics. Not just some people, not just marginalized groups. Everyone. And if you think you're not, you're probably the most dangerous player in the game. See, we've weaponized the term identity politics. It's become this sneaky little phrase we use to dismiss other people's concerns while protecting our own. When Black Americans worry about police brutality, that's identity politics. When women fight for equal pay, identity politics. But when rural gun owners rail against background checks as tyranny, when billionaire CEOs complain about tax rates, when Christians demand nativity scenes in public squares, well, that's just good old-fashioned politics, right? Wrong, dead wrong. This sleight of hand is brilliant in its simplicity. We've made identity something only marginalized groups have, while making dominant group identities invisible. But here's the truth that makes people uncomfortable. American is an identity. Christian is an identity. When politicians end speeches with, "God bless America," they're not talking to God. They're talking to our bedrock identities. Don't believe me? Then explain why there are virtually no open atheists in national politics. In a country that supposedly separates church and state, that's not an accident. That's identity politics in action. The identities that hold the most power are the ones that are so pervasive they become invisible or uncontroversial. It's like being a fish who doesn't know they're swimming in water. But the story gets even stranger. Something remarkable happened over the past few decades, something that reveals just how deep this identity transformation goes. We can call it the Great Awakening. In 1994, 39% of Democrats and 26% of Republicans said discrimination was the main reason black people couldn't get ahead. By 2017, 64% of Democrats believed that, but only 14% of Republicans. That's not just polarization, that's complete tribal separation. But here's the kicker, and this is going to blow your mind. This shift was driven primarily by white Democrats. White liberals have moved so far left on race that they're now, on many issues, to the left of typical black voters. Let that sink in. White liberals are now less likely than African Americans to say that black people should be able to get ahead without special help. This isn't your grandfather's Democratic Party. Being a Democrat today, especially a white Democrat, requires a commitment to racial equality built on an understanding of systemic racism as a central organizing principle of American society. Meanwhile, what's happening on the other side? As America becomes more diverse, the Republican coalition becomes whiter and more desperate. It's simple math with explosive consequences. Democrats need an excited, diverse coalition to win. Republicans need an enthused white base. This means Democrats must build platforms that are more explicitly focused on racial and gender equality, while Republicans must design politics that responds to a coalition that feels itself losing power. This is the engine driving everything we see in American politics today. It's not going away, it's accelerating. Now, before you think I'm just cheerleading for identity politics, let me tell you about its dark side, because there is one, and it's getting darker. First, there's the atomization problem. As we've sliced American society into increasingly narrow identity categories, we've started ignoring bigger problems that affect everyone. While activists focus on microaggressions and cultural appropriation, significant chunks of white working-class America have been dragged into an underclass comparable to what African Americans experienced in the 70s and 80s. The opioid crisis, largely ignored by the left until recently. Rural poverty, not sexy enough for the identity politics crowd. Automation threatening to destroy millions of jobs across all racial and gender lines. Where's the movement for that? This narrow focus isn't just bad policy, it's bad politics. European left-wing parties are learning this the hard way, losing working-class voters to far-right parties because they stopped speaking to class-based concerns. Second, there's the free speech problem. When politics becomes about lived experience rather than rational discourse, we're in trouble. Suddenly, the fact that an argument offends someone's sense of self-worth becomes sufficient reason to shut it down. Social media has made this worse, rewarding emotional outrage over thoughtful deliberation. The result? A political culture where your opinion becomes fused with your authentic self, making compromise impossible and debate dangerous. But here's the most insidious part. Identity politics on the left has created a monster on the right. It's like a political arms race where each side's escalation justifies the other's extremism. The rise of political correctness, and yes, that's a real phenomenon, not just conservative hysteria, has become rocket fuel for right-wing mobilization. When the left creates lists of things you can't say without facing withering moral opprobrium, the right responds by making those forbidden statements badges of honor. Every society has boundaries around acceptable discourse. In liberal democracies, you're free to believe Hitler was right or slavery was benevolent, but you'll face social consequences. That's normal and necessary. But when those boundaries expand to cover an ever-growing list of opinions held by regular Americans, you create a backlash that can consume everything. This is the feedback loop that's destroying American democracy. Polarized institutions create polarized publics, which demand even more polarized institutions, which create even more polarized publics. We're trapped in a cycle where each side's radicalization justifies the other's extremism. Let me paint you a picture of where this is heading. In 2018, Los Angeles Mayor Eric Garcetti told a story that perfectly captures our dilemma. He appointed people to 300 city positions and made them, for the first time, over 50% women. His approach? Talk less, act more. Just quietly diversify and get back to business. But imagine that happening at the national level, attempted by America's first female president, with our polarized media hunting for conflict. Half the country would celebrate it as justice finally served. The other half would see it as discrimination, threat, and loss. Here's the uncomfortable truth. The world isn't zero-sum, but it sometimes is zero-sum. A world where 50% of government appointees are women is a world where fewer are men. Those losses will be felt and fought. Powerful movements will arise to protect what's being taken, to justify how things used to be. Society often appears calm when fundamental injustices go unchallenged, but that calm was always an illusion built on the silence of the oppressed. As historically marginalized groups gain power to demand their share of the American dream, that false peace shatters. We're living through a partisan realignment that began in the 1960s and keeps reshaping how we see each other. We've sorted into ideological tribes, armed our identities for political warfare, and built feedback loops that reward extremism. The main story of American politics isn't just policy, it's the logic of polarization itself. Institutions respond to polarized publics, and in turn deepen the divide. Understanding identity politics isn't about picking sides, it's about seeing how identity already steers all of our politics. The real choice isn't between identity and some imaginary neutral politics. It's between using identity as a weapon or as a bridge. If this episode left you unsettled, you're in good company. Want the full, uncut analysis and extra interviews? Download Skoob app now to get access to the full story. That's Identity Wars for today. I'm your host. Thanks for listening.